Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for Quiltmaker magazine. In the May-June issue, I've got an article all about quilting feathers. Feathers are a traditional free motion quilting and hand quilting design that a lot of quilters want to master, and they can be really tricky to get the hang of. So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips to get started, and in the magazine you will find a diagram that you can mark and trace on your fabric and get a lot of practice quilting this beautiful shape. So I've marked 3 of the feathers on a small scrap of fabric, and it's a pretty small design. And there's an important reason for that, and that is a smaller scale gives you more repetition with the least amount of wasted fabric. So mark this several times on white fabric. It'll be really easy to trace, and that will give you a lot of bang for your buck practicing. Now the first way that I want to demonstrate stitching this is to stitch straight down the center stem. And I did a straight stem on this feather design, so that way it's a lot easier to master. Now wiggly stems can kind of be a little tricky. Now for this first feather, I'm going to swing out, I'm going to travel stitch over, and then come in. Now I'm going to travel stitch along the back of that feather, it's called a travel back feather, and then swing out for the next feather shape. And oops, I actually filled in 2 instead of 1 right there. That's okay. If you kind of get confused by your marks, just kind of mark them a little darker than I did here, and you'll be able to see them a lot better. It still doesn't matter. These are going to look great. But you can see how these are being formed by traveling back along the previous feather, swinging out and around for the next feather. Now let's say you give this a try and it just doesn't work for you. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Well, there's a couple things you can try. Try rotating your quilt all the way around, your little square all the way around, and try quilting it from another direction and see if that helps. Swing out and around just like that. Keep making the same shapes and the same movements. Travel back, swing out and around. But just see if that direction change of being able to see it this way instead of this way works for you. Also, another thing to keep in mind is your travel stitching. When I'm travel stitching, I'm going very slow. That's really slow. And then whenever I come out of that travel stitch area and swing out for my feather, I can speed up, put my foot down a little bit, but then as soon as I go back into travel stitching, I really slow down, so that way I maintain a nice control over my stitches and it still looks nice. It still has a good stitch quality. Okay, so that finishes up one side. Now here, let me be honest. I can stitch that direction, kind of forming the feather out and around like this. I really struggle to form it the opposite direction that's forming it straight down. So let me give you permission. You don't have to stitch in both directions. You can just use that stem to travel stitch all the way down, and you can use the same direction on both sides. You can go up from the bottom or down from the top if that's the way your brain works. If you're like me and you just can't stitch it in the opposite direction, understand that you don't have to build skill for both directions. It's not necessary. You can always use that stem to travel stitch. Okay, another way to form a feather is to travel up the center of the stem. I'm going to try not to skip one this time. There we go. I picked the right one, I think. You're going to swing out and you're going to kind of bounce against the feather before. You're going to travel stitch back carefully along the curved end of the feather and then bounce out again for the next feather. So this is a bounce bounce or a bump bump feather. You're going to travel up the stem, come out and bump against the first feather, travel stitch along the tip around that curved end, and bounce out with your next feather. So each time you form 2 feather shapes. This is, in my opinion, a little trickier because it requires just a little bit more concentration. You have to remember what you're doing at any given time. It's a little bit less of a repetitive movement. But this might work for you. This might be a good feathered style to try. Just see if that works for you, or if the travel back feather that I demonstrated first works better. It's really interesting to see how different quilters can quilt the same exact design. They still look like beautiful feathers, but they might be quilted very, very differently. Coming out for one more. And I'll finish that one off just like that. Bumping out and come back down there. The other thing that the reason that I like this style better is you see the travel stitching is always consistently between the feathers, just like this. Whereas this one has a little bit of travel stitching here and a little bit of travel stitching in the stem. It kind of bounces between the two. Either way, both are beautiful ways of quilting a feather, so definitely get a lot of practice stitching this. Try different directions, rotate your piece around, don't hesitate to see if something else, some other angle works better for you. So that's it for stitching feathers. We've learned 2 different ways that we can approach this design, but understand this is just 2 different ways to quilt it. You can quilt feathers in 100 different ways, and these are just the ways that work best for me. I'd really be intrigued to see what works best for you. So definitely give it a try. Use the design included in the May-June issue of Quiltmaker magazine to mark the feather design on some practice fabric. Stitch it multiple times. Your first time's not going to look great. Your second time probably is not going to look much better. But I promise you, by the time you repeat this process 10 or 15 times, you're going to know that shape, you're going to know the angle that works best for you, and you're going to be able to pick which style of feather works best for you as well. You'll see definite improvement every time you stitch it out. So take your time, put some practice in, and have fun quilting feathers on your home sewing machine. So my name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for Quiltmaker magazine. Find all of the articles that I've shared with them about free motion quilting and the 2015 issues of Quiltmaker magazine. Until next time, let's go quilt. Click the videos to find more awesome tutorials on free motion quilting based on articles for Quiltmaker magazine.